Hello everyone, and today we will once again be discussing the weather that is occurring over the next few days. One thing that has changed from the last weather forecast is that things have intensified. Basically, the weather, we are expecting more from it, and that definitely will change things on what is going to happen and also how this forecast is going to go. We will be talking about what the models are saying and making sure you get the most accurate idea of those models as possible. We'll also be going over the tropical activity, which is existing. However, it's more than it used to be, but I'm not really convinced that it's anything huge that is going to happen. Well, it isn't going to be anything that huge that's going to happen, as it is just a tropical storm right now. But I will say that there is quite a lot to talk about and quite a lot to be prepared for, so make sure that you're prepared with this weather event. I will probably be doing a live stream tonight at around 4, maybe 3 Eastern Daylight Time. I would say that's in like 2 hours from now. Right now it's 12:43 my local time as I'm filming this video. But 3 Eastern Time is when a live stream will begin. The one thing that I have to say about the live stream, I'm not going to be available between 6 and 7:30, so there'll be a break in the live stream if I am to live stream, which is most likely. So just realize that it probably will be a little bit earlier, actually, 5:30 to 7:30, and that is kind of in the peak of the event. So just be aware of that. You're going to have to, like, take a break for a second or something like that. But otherwise, let's get right into the video. Okay, so first I am going to talk about the tropical activity that's ongoing. We do have Tropical Storm Arthur, which was just named earlier this morning. And to be honest, I will say with this storm, it's not looking too pleasant, I would say. If you look at the satellite for the storm, you can see how it developed. Its center of circulation is exposed. You can see how much wind shear is impacting it too, as the clouds are entirely on the right side of the system. And there is also not a lot of clouds over the part that is the exposed circulation, since the name exposed circulation. There's also not a lot of clouds past, like, no bands, really. There's just this one band on the southeast side, and that's basically it. So you can see there's a lot of wind shear impacting the storm, and, I mean, it's hard to tell if this even is a tropical storm, but since the NHC has forecasted it as such, we're going to go with it anyways. This does have tropical storm warnings in effect for Texas and Louisiana. As you can see here, let me just go to it. As you can see here, you can see there's some tropical storm warnings in effect for Texas and Louisiana. It's going to be a tropical depression by the time it moves inland, and then eventually going to be an extratropical depression strength storm as it moves into Louisiana. So, very brief storm to start off the hurricane season. It was kind of expected. This hurricane season is not expected to be anything crazy. Even if it is, it's not going to be a lot of storms, so that's probably what we're expecting, especially with the El Nino season, the El Nino waters in the southeastern Pacific. So that's what we're currently expecting right now. Not much with this tropical storm, but there is something interesting that it will cause. If you go to the SPC Outlook, and of course don't pay attention to the moderate risk that's in Illinois and Indiana, we'll be talking about that later for sure, you can see there is a slight risk now in Louisiana and Mississippi. And the reason for that is actually a tornado risk that has been influenced by this hurricane. This hurricane is causing some tropical storm. This tropical storm is causing some tornadic potential to occur in the deep south. And of course, that's fairly typical with tropical systems. It's especially true with this one since there's a lot of wind shear, and of course, wind shear is what causes the storms to rotate and eventually build down to the surface and create a tornado. So here it is fairly likely that we're going to get that as well. Much more likely than yesterday we're going to get a tornadic event. So that's very interesting for New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and all those areas in between in Louisiana and Mississippi. So be alert for that. But what our main event we're focusing on today, if you look just up here, is of course the moderate risk. The moderate risk for Illinois and Indiana is pretty much the first moderate risk in only like 6 days. We had the last moderate risk 6 days ago. And this is basically the exact same thing. It's in the exact, not really exact same area, it's a little further southeast, but it's basically the same thing. It's basically the same ordeal. You have a 15 Sig 2 tornado risk, Sig 2, which is the new outlook methodology done by the SPC nowadays. A Sig 2 represents that EF3 or more tornadoes are possible. And this is specifically in the area with the Sig 2 hatching in Illinois and Indiana. So be alert for that. There is a potential for EF3 or more tornadoes to develop out of this system. That is completely unrelated to the tropical storm, by the way. It's completely unrelated. So don't expect that a tropical storm is causing all of this damage. It's not really the tropical storm. It's a completely different system. It's a trough ejecting from the northwest. So we'll look into that later. We also do have a Sig 1 around that, a 10 Sig 1 and a 5 Sig 1, which means EF2 plus tornadoes are possible, which isn't as strong, but still be alert if you live in those areas. This will contain areas just outside of Indianapolis, which is under the Sig 2 risk. It'll include Muncie, some parts of western Ohio, almost Chicago, not quite, probably like the Kankakee area, almost St. Louis, but slightly north of it, Quincy, Illinois, and those regions. And that will be what we see with this risk outside of the 15 Sig 2. And then, of course, we have a 2% around that and the 5% in Louisiana. The 2% around that, there is still some potential for some stronger storms up here around the cold core setup, but I think it has weakened the potential for that a little bit. But we still are watching it. There is a cold core potential setup for this system where the morning convection hasn't been impacting the area as much. But we're still watching it. We'll still see what it is yet to do. So let's start looking at the forecast for this system. First, we're going to go over the Illinois and Indiana system. Now, this system, we are currently expecting a lot to be complicated with this system. So therefore, there's a lot of complications that occur, and that's probably the reason why you've heard there isn't a high risk issued. High risk, of course, is the highest level that SPC Outlook can put in their outlook. But we haven't issued that, mainly because of this system right here. This MCS that has developed over Illinois and in Iowa. This is mainly in the general risk area that we're looking at for the severe weather, and that's mainly limiting our potential for severe weather components. As you can see, as the system is approaching, and as the system still has some potential with it, you can see that there is actually a lot of CAPE that has been lost with this system. And it's not necessarily just because this system has lost it, it's also because it's the morning. There's not enough CAPE in this region yet, but still, even with this is limiting our factors for tornadic development and stuff like that later on in the line. You can see there is a little bit of CAPE further south of the system, but as you pull this out forward, you can see it kind of gets swallowed up a little bit by the storms you can see here. It gets swallowed up by this MCS that is developing near the Peoria area into Quincy, Illinois. So overall, you can see that there is some limiting factors to this tornadic development in Illinois and Indiana, and we have to watch those. But there is one thing that I'm looking at. You can see on the HRRR, there is a potential for some cold core development to occur in Minnesota, which is where the 2% risk is at. You can see there is a slight risk for some storms to develop, and looking at the conditions for that, it doesn't look like it's that insane or anything like that. You can see there isn't much of a cap in place, which is good for this storm. There is some CAPE, but only on the western side of this. This is only like 1,000 joules per kilogram, so it's really not that much, but it can cause something, especially with the shear. It might be a high shear, low CAPE environment, even though the shear, to be honest, is not even that high, but it still can produce some tornadoes. You can see up to 138 SRH, which isn't bad, but it isn't great either. I'm not expecting any strong tornadoes or anything up here in Minnesota. It is a risk, but I'm not expecting much with it. So I think that will be okay for the most part. But yeah, you can see that there is some SRH in the Minnesota area. It's definitely not too strong, but it still may be conducive for some development of some sorts. However, if you do look down here, and let me change the model run since it's actually been a couple of hours since I filmed the last clip, you just didn't notice. It is still very intense, the SRH in Illinois and Indiana. You can see there's up to 600 SRH in this region, which is a lot, but of course, if there's no storms there, that doesn't really matter much. The storms are most likely going to be over here. And speaking of the storms, if we move out to the, what time is it, 2 p.m. area SPC, what am I saying? CDT, you can see that there is some storms trying to develop up here in upper Missouri and western Illinois. They're not that strong yet, but you can see their progression as they continue to form into a line and potentially a tornadic line as they continue to move down towards the south. This is what we're watching for. Even though these are a line, and that typically, even if it is organized, typically doesn't produce very long track tornadoes, it can, in this case, if it's broken up like this. You can see there's a broken up supercells. We'll really just have to wait and see how this pans out. But this definitely is conducive for severe weather, for sure. And if you look over here, what did I just do? If you look over here at the shear, there is noticeable shear in this area. It's definitely not as strong as the shear here in Illinois and Indiana, which is more conducive for rapid tornado development. But this over here is showing the start of something big. And we will see that start of something big as we move into the 3 p.m. 2 p.m. area. You can also see there is some SRH in the area. That's not the main concern. I mean, it's not going to be too intense yet. This is going to be the main area of the line, which is 100, 150, so that is notable. You can also see the other parameters, the significant tornado parameter, which does exist in this area and gets up to 4. However, realize that this is not even the peak. Realize the peak comes a couple of hours later, where you can really see that significant tornado parameter go up to 6 in Illinois. And if you see that, that's part of the line. That actually is part of the line that is developing with all these supercells. Now, over here, it doesn't look as interesting as further out west. One thing I'm noticing with this model run, even after the past few runs, is that it's not really showing convection going all the way into Indiana. So I'm not sure if this is super reliable. I'm going to look at the other model runs. If you see the NAM3K, which usually likes to make it into a line more, you can see it has a linear bias. So that's not really going to be conducive for tornadoes if that comes to fruition, but I don't know if it's going to come to fruition because they always kind of do this. You can see that there is some line potential in Illinois and not really in Indiana. However, if we go over to one of the model runs, RFSA, you can see there is some supercell potential in the Indiana area. And if we move back a little, you can see there is one supercell, one rogue supercell near Lafayette that does develop. And that will be more akin to the current outlook that we're seeing on the SPC. You can also see the storms in Minnesota. They still exist. I'm not really expecting too much with them, but you can see that there is a reasonable amount of CAPE here, not that much. There was just a mesoscale discussion issued for them. It's not really expecting much, so we're not going to really see too much in the way of tornadoes with that environment. However, if you look at the significant tornado parameter, even going into Indiana, it gets pretty high. And this actually is underdoing the significant tornado parameter a little bit, I think. However, it does show the convection much better. They all have their flaws, it seems like, these model runs, but you can still see that there is quite a bit of energy left for these storms to grow upscale. And one thing I'm noticing with these model runs is it's trending a lot more linear. That will be less conducive for tornadoes. However, it was kind of already showing that yesterday, so I'm unsure if we're going to get like the broken up line with more discrete supercells within, or we're going to get more of this big line that is mostly going to be a damaging wind issue. It's really confusing, especially with how the morning convection went. But one thing I will say, it does seem like the conditions are rapidly deteriorating out ahead of the convection that was in this morning. And it actually does seem that in real life too. So it seems like these model runs are getting that right. So maybe even if there is a line, there'll be still some tornado potential. It might not be as strong if it does congeal into a line. I think that's the main situation we're seeing here. How quickly these storms congeal into a line. And that would reduce the hail risk, that would reduce the tornado risk. Not fully, though, so we'll see how it impacts the tornado risk as we move on. But you can see there's also some risk in Ohio for some severe weather. It's not as tornadic in that region, as that's only in a 5% risk, but you can see there is some potential, and there is this one discrete supercell in Indiana. Let's take a sounding of it. So this region... wrong. Okay, so this doesn't allow a sounding on this model run, so okay. Let me go to 17Z. Yeah, here it doesn't really show the supercell, but let's take a sounding anyways. On this model run, you can see there is a very decent signature for tornadic activity. You can see a very curved photograph. You can see that Storm Slinky is definitely moving left and then moving right back again, which is indicative of some sort of tornadic development. There's also some veering with height, and it actually is pretty strong. The thing is, this is also contaminated. The thing is, there isn't that much of a dry slot here. However, it is kind of higher up, so that might indicate a cap. You can see, though, with this cap product, there isn't that much of a cap. What am I saying? Cap isn't that intense. So we definitely could see some instability still work its way through this area and potentially produce tornado in development. However, the main area we're still watching is over here in Illinois. Let's take a sounding over here. You can see this actually doesn't look as favorable as Indiana. I will say that. This isn't moving towards the left right away. However, I realize there's a lot of contamination on that, so let me take that again. Because those red lines mean contamination. Okay, this is good. This looks okay. I'm not sure if it's as good as the Indiana sounding, which is surprising, but there is a little more temperature dew point spread, which means that it'll be a little bit higher cloud tops, so it'll be a little less likely for tornadoes to develop, but not that more unlikely. There is veering with height, there is a dry slope, but it's very high up in the atmosphere, and there is a lot of cape and some cap. It's not that bad, but it's some cap. So you can see there is a conducive environment. It's definitely not what we were seeing yesterday, and that's why we're not getting a high risk, as many people have pointed out as a possibility. We're not getting a high risk at this point. We would have gotten it already. I can tell, even though there is daytime heating occurring right now, even with the morning convection, it doesn't look that conducive for tornadoes. Like, it looks conducive for tornadoes EF3 plus for sure, but I don't think about EF4 plus yet. It could still happen, theoretically, but I don't know if that's needed in an outlook or not. You can see, as we move later down the line into the night, you can see there is more of a line that develops with the system that goes into Louisville, southern Illinois, southern Missouri. So that will also be aligned with the potential for damaging winds. Let's actually check the winds here. You can see there is some winds here, but it's actually not that much. I'm pretty sure that's actually not the right product. You would have to go to this. Well, actually, that's not really that good either. I don't know. I don't know what the wind product is on this. But you can see that there is some still backing of the winds in the higher atmosphere. And you can see there is some flow, but definitely not in the right direction. It seems like all of it is moving this way. So, well, yeah, it's all moving in the opposite direction as it should. But you can see, as we move on, I don't know if it's actually moving in the opposite direction as you should, but you can see there's much more forcing here in the Missouri, Illinois, Indiana area as we move earlier on. So the forcing isn't an issue. It seems like it's just the main issue is congealing into a line. If there's too much moisture, that's going to impact. You can also see the SRH. I mean, the cap also exists, but it's not that bad in this area. That's not the main concern today. I would say the SRH is a problem. You can see there can be too much SRH. If we go back a little bit, there could be too much SRH. Let me just go back to that scan. Okay, over here. There is a risk for too much SRH, but it's actually not looking as bad as it was yesterday. Now it's only saying like 600 SRH in Indiana, which is good. It's not too much. I don't think it's too much. So this might actually be more conducive for tornadoes. It's really looking like the only issue is that at this point is if there's too many storms that develop, that merging of the systems into one line. So that's mainly the problem we've experienced this year. But I honestly think that a moderate risk is good for this because there is very intense conditions for tornadic development. And I think this could play out pretty similar to what we saw a few days ago in Illinois. I think it could pan out similar to that. Not sure if it could be worse, but we'll see. We'll see. Just be weather aware in this area anyways, because this is potentially a very damaging weather event for some people, and just be aware that this has a lot of risk to it, and be aware to keep your weather alerts on, and tune in to live streams if necessary. Tune into your local weather radio if you can't, and make sure to always be close to your safe spot if you need to go to it at any moment of the time when you get issued under a tornado warning. But of course, we do have another risk, of course, the Louisiana and Mississippi risk. This doesn't seem as powerful as what the SPC was issuing, but it does seem like there is still a risk here. You can see some supercellular type stuff developing, and this will be potentially some tornadic signatures with these storms. You could take a sounding with this, but I'm pretty sure it works differently with hurricanes. I'm unsure, to be honest, but you can see that this risk doesn't last for long. It's only going to last a couple of hours. You can see the main peak of it is right here, I would say. You can see some isolated supercells here. That is around 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So there's very isolated supercells possible with this. I don't think it's going to be anything widespread. You can look at the environment here. It's kind of harder to look at this environment when you get hurricanes, or tropical storms, but you can see there is quite a bit of shear. In fact, there's probably more shear up north, more than the shear up north. However, the reason is the coverage. And you can also see the SRH is very low in this region. We'd have to look over here. So I'm unsure if this is going to be very conducive for tornadoes or anything like that. You don't have any significant tornado parameters, which makes sense because there was no significant tornadoes issued, like no SIG risk issued. CIG or whatever it's called. And you can see the updraft helicity. It does exist a little bit, but I don't think that this risk is going to be too big either. Just be weather aware if you live in this area too. It's a little more unexpected what happens in tropical storms sometimes. This storm is making landfall now, so you do also have to worry about the winds too, but honestly, the winds aren't that bad with this system. It's mostly the rain that will be an issue. And with the rain, we also do have a flooding risk. You can see there is quite a bit of flooding possible over here in the Illinois-Indiana region. Also, especially down here where the tropical storm is currently. A little bit east of it where the main convection is of that storm. So you can see there is some flooding also possible today. Especially with that line that develops too. But that's going to be a more quick-paced flash flooding event. That will cause some issues, but definitely not as many issues since it's so quick hitting, but it will be very heavy rain, so maybe it will be the same amount of issues. This will be less consistent, this will be less consistently heavy rain, but still it will be heavy at times with the bands that are moving through, and it will much more likely last longer. So you can see moderate risk and effect for Louisiana, Mississippi, and parts of Alabama, and then Illinois and Indiana over here. So overall, that was today. And you can see there's quite a bit that could happen today, especially from EF3 plus tornadoes to a potential environment with more tornadoes than we probably have ever seen this year, or maybe the same amount, but like stronger tornadoes at that. And also a potential tropical storm in the deep south, well, an already tropical storm in the deep south that's going to be remaining a tropical system with possible tornadoes in the deep south. However, we of course haven't talked about tomorrow yet. Now for tomorrow, there is a risk tomorrow, specifically a slight risk. And this has been smushed a little bit to the east, you can see. It's now only encompassing New York, Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Boston, Washington, D.C., and those areas in the east. You can see there was a 2% tornado risk added over here in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. That probably won't do much. I mean, I'm not expecting much will happen over there because that's so far north and the environment probably won't be super conducive or anything like that. However, you can see there is still some tornado risk from that tropical system too. It's going to be kind of connecting with the upper trough in this area, so you'll see it's kind of not really a tropical system anymore at this point. You can see there will be some risk for tornadoes from New Orleans all the way up to Savannah area, the Chattahoochee River. And then, of course, you do have the wind risk tomorrow, which is mostly this area. I'm not expecting this to have as many tornadoes as we saw, on Sunday when I filmed my last video, where we had a lot of tornadoes in Pennsylvania. However, I do think there is some risk for tornadoes, but specifically down here. I'm not so confident in this, but let's look at the model. So you can see as we move on here, that line continues to weaken as it moves into the east. And you can see there is some rain that begins to develop. You can see a small little line in my area, northern New Jersey. But you can see there's still some convection in this region down here in the south. I'm not sure if that's the best environment. Let's look over there, because I think maybe it could be better than today, but it's really unfavorable for the most part, well, compared to the environment that we're seeing today. You can see there is a lot of cape, but that's pretty typical with these systems in the deep south. You can see there is more SRH, so the fact that there's more SRH already means that there's more of a potential for a tornadic environment, and there also is more bulk shear. So I feel like tomorrow might actually be better than today in terms of tornadic development from the tropical system. So we might actually see a 5% risk added to that region too. I don't think a 5 sig 1, because I think it's pretty rare we see strong tropical storms, strong tornadoes from this type of environment. So we'll see what happens with it. But you can see there also is a fairly high shear environment over here in the New England area. That's the main reason why we're keeping that 2% tornado risk in that region. But there isn't a lot of cape. And that's the main reason that we're looking at. There isn't a ton of cape. I don't think this is the right product over here. There isn't a ton of cape, but that's pretty typical of these regions, especially with how far north this is. But there is some, and you can see it kind of overspreads the area of Massachusetts into New Hampshire. You can see there is a small little bit of 1,000 joules per kilogram. Let's take a small sounding from there. This is actually showing not a horrible environment, but it's definitely not the best. You can see there is a bit of a good storm slinky because it's moving to the left initially, and you can see there is a Tor possibility, a classic supercell changing with height, and there is some curvature with the hodograph, but it's not anything too insane, and a little more spreading of those dew point temperature spreads. But that actually isn't a bad sounding, so I get why they issued the 2% from that. However, it's going to be a very brief risk, it seems, especially as you see the cape kind of move through, and it's not going to be a very long time, especially since this is such a small area with the 2% risk. I don't think that risk is going to be updated, but I think maybe the risk down here could be upgraded to a 5%. But of course, we still got to look at the wind and stuff like that. Because there is a wind risk tomorrow. You can see there is a line that develops later in the night, but that's not really the main concern we're looking at. We're looking at the reflectivity overall with these little storms that develop all around this area. You can see some storms here in the Massachusetts area. Those are what potentially could produce the tornadoes. But you can see that line does become a concern later on as you see it moving through the West Virginia, Kentucky area, which is why we have a marginal risk in that region too. So definitely a lot to cover. I probably will also be live tomorrow, but not only if the risk gets upgraded. I don't know if it's going to get upgraded. Probably in the deep south, more likely than the New England area. But if it does get upgraded, I'll be here to cover it. So we'll see what happens. Once again, if I do go live tomorrow, it's probably going to be the same time where I'm going to have to take a break, like 6 to 7. So just be careful with that. With this risk, it could potentially go haywire, but not as much as, of course, today. So with that said, what generally are we looking at for the pattern up ahead? Well, you can see what is causing this pattern to develop right now with the tornado potential in Illinois and Indiana. There is a slightly negatively tilted trough, or maybe slightly positively tilted. It's pretty neutral, honestly. But you can see there is quite a bit of those short waves, which is causing, especially down here in Ohio and Indiana, which is causing that small more about a convection to develop. And that definitely will increase the risk a little bit. But as you go further on into Friday and further on, you can see we do still have the potential for some storms. There is a slight risk. I think it was in Nebraska or something like that on Saturday. And you can see there is a small little short wave in that region, and that probably is what's causing it. But I'm not sure if we'll be getting those big, large-scale systems anymore. It seems like we're going to be more focused on these, like, tiny little short waves for the rest of June. I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. but it doesn't look like we're going to get that big trough again the more that I'm looking at this. Once again, this is the first time I'm looking at this model. You can see there might be another risk up here in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I don't know what's going on with this Northeast risks, honestly. I've never seen this many of these risks, but there might be more of this risk on Monday, which is a possibility. You can see that moves through. And then we kind of get a little quiet, but you can see there is another trough developing there. So we might have a few days of a break, but then we get that northwest flow, it seems, again. So, anyways, guys, that's basically going to be it for me. I hope I covered this well, especially since there is a lot to cover. There's a lot to look over with the dynamics and stuff. So please make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications. If you don't know what the notifications look like, it's the bell icon next to the subscribe button. Also, make sure to like this video. I don't care if you dislike. If you really don't like this video, fine, dislike. But anyways, guys, it's always interesting to note other people's perspectives. And it's always interesting to fly by other people's perspectives when you're driving on the Moise Data on the Road freeway. Goodbye, guys.